Okay, welcome back. Let's talk a little bit about China during the age of imperialism. Okay, China was a little bit different because up until the beginning of the 19th century, China was a major economic power in Asia, and they were able to compete against Europeans. In fact, they were able to dictate to Europeans the terms under which they would trade. But by the 1800s, those things were starting to change. China was entering into a period of decline, and that coupled with the fact that Europe was industrializing and was becoming richer and was becoming more powerful, particularly militarily, and they were looking to expand their markets because of industrialization, that didn't bode well for China. In the 1830s, there was a conflict between the British and the Chinese over the trade of opium. The British wanted to use opium as a major trade item. The Chinese did not want to do this. The British refused to stop, and so this led to an actual war. One that didn't go very well for the Chinese because the Treaty of Nanjing basically made the Chinese pay an indemnity, damages to the British for the things that happened during the war. Hong Kong came under British control. It only has recently, like the past 20 years, gone back to China. The British were granted extraterritoriality, which means that British citizens were not subjected to Chinese laws. They could pretty much act and behave as they wanted to. And Britain was granted most favored status, which means that any conditions that were given to another country, Britain was at least entitled to those, if not better. And one of the things this led to is other countries starting to demand similar concessions from China. Um, China continued to decline internally. One of the major manifestations of this decline was the Taiping Rebellion in the mid 1800s. People were upset with the corruption of the government, things falling apart. These people that led this rebellion, which had Christian overtones, um, they wanted land reform, they wanted community ownership of property, equality for women, strict morality, kind of a broad range of things. But unfortunately for them, they were defeated. This is probably one of the most devastating wars that was ever fought. 20 million people died in this rebellion. There were some efforts with reform, particularly after this Taiping Rebellion. The self strengthening movement actually urged the adoption of Western techniques, ideas, um, things to help China start to catch up with the world again. China unfortunately got involved with the war with the Japanese. It was called the Sino-Japanese War in 1894. This was for control over the Korean Peninsula, and the Chinese lost. And one of the things that China saw from this is at the negotiations table, the Japanese were dressed like Europeans. The Chinese were the only ones that were dressed as Chinese, and this made them look awkward, to the rest of the world. So um, this kind of signaled to the rest of the world that China was weak and China was kind of ripe for the taking. In 1899, China was forced by several European countries to open their ports and allow these countries to have access to their markets. Um, a lot of resentment on the part of the Chinese. They didn't like this domination by European powers in their markets. They also didn't like the presence of missionaries trying to convert people to Christianity. This led to an uprising in 1899 called the Boxer Uprising, the Boxer Rebellion, largely as an anti-foreign reaction to Europeans being there in China. Um, it was suppressed by invasion from outside forces. China was forced to even give more concessions, pay reparations for this. And the humiliation of being dominated by these outside forces led to the development of a Chinese nationalist movement, which ultimately in 1912 is going to lead to the abolition of the emperor and establishing a republic under Sun Yat-sen. Um, and you can see this map that China is kind of wedged in between British India. You see that the French are present in Southeast Asia. Then, of course, the Japanese are right off the coast, controlling the Korean Peninsula.